okay. I said I'd never caught myself crying. I'm struggling with understanding what happened to me and accepting it. It's hard for me to not blame myself. I don't know if it makes sense. I don't know if it will ever make sense, but I really want to heal. I want to come out the other side. I'm just very scared.
My name is Metiya Ikoa. I'm 33 years old and I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse and sexual assault. This is my story. "2024 for me started out different from the get-go. I was actually in a church service on 31 December 2023. One of my favorite aunties had us do this exercise to write one word that was going to represent what 2024 would be for us. The word that I wrote down was fearless. When I wrote that word down, I wasn't thinking or imagining that this was gonna be the end result. I was thinking of fearless in terms of my business, fitness, my non-profit, doing my own thing, Forbes, something, But, God had a different plan. At the end of 2023, I found out that my church offers therapy services. And I thought, you know what, let me try this. Let me try therapy in my faith, because I had previously had therapy before. So from about 2019, I was going to therapy with work. I work in professional services for the big 4 global firms. Even though I'd had therapy for like a few years, I still felt like there was something going on mentally that I needed help with. And at that time, I'll be completely honest with you, it was because I couldn't sleep. So since 2019, my sleep was rough. My sleep was so bad. Guys, I was like sleeping 3-4 hours maximum. And it's like I would go to bed, then I'd wake up 3 or 4 hours later in a panic attack in the night, in my sleep. So I wake up, my heart is doing palpitations. I'm sweating, drenched in sweat. My bed is drenched in sweat. I tried everything. I even bought a Temper mattress. Do you know how expensive that thing is? I saw an advert. Serena Williams was sleeping on the Temper mattress. I was like, maybe this one will help my sleep. Let me just give them. Get the money. Honey. The bed wasn't the problem, okay? The magnesium concoction, yeah, it's not a magnesium glycinate issue, darling. It's trauma. So I am matched up to a therapist from my church services in church, and we start the therapy. First session, boy, she's different. She was very involved. Like, she was asking me questions, really prodding. This is during 10 days of prayer, mind you. So we are all praying in church. All of us are praying. My local church, we're praying for breakthrough, for healing, for transformation, for manifestation of God's glory in our lives through 2024. I come to my second session. My therapist looks me dead in the eye. She says to me, Metiya, I think you have an addiction problem. Girl, who? Me? Addiction to what? She was like, yeah, I think you're addicted to work. I was like, how? And she started bringing up examples like my behaviors, the things I had explained. She was like, an addiction, basically, when you're not doing it, you're thinking of doing it. Like, it consumes every part of your mind. And she was right. She was 100% right. But it was difficult for me because I believed that my work was my calling from God, things that would help and serve other people. And she was like, workaholism is just as serious as any other addiction, as a gambling addiction or a drinking addiction, an alcohol addiction, a pornography addiction, a sex addiction. Almost every addiction stems from unresolved pain or unresolved trauma. It's like there's a fear of losing control, that somehow it will like uncover all of this mental or emotional or physical anguish you have experienced that your brain just doesn't want to go near because it's too painful. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like this is serious. But at that point, I just couldn't connect anything, you guys. So yeah, we started off on the 12 steps of addiction recovery. Step 1 is admitting that I have a problem and that my life has become unmanageable. And then, surrendering that. It was really difficult for me, you guys, but I kept thinking about that unresolved pain, unresolved trauma. What is my brain trying to cover up? So that is what got me to commit to that first week. And I remember when it was over, like, I was so happy. I was like, yes, I can't wait for therapy today. I got in my session. I was like, oh, I did it. I did it. Tick, tick, tick. I did 1 week. I said, now can I go back? Girl. She was like, yeah, this is just the beginning. And I went from 1 week and got to 52 weeks of healing. And I have to say, it has been the most difficult and hardest year of my life. I never imagined that I would be able to even revisit the wounds that I had buried so deeply below. But it's something that I heard that I'll never forget, and that motivated me to keep on going even when I thought that I was drowning. And that phrase is that unless you heal the wound, it's going to keep on bleeding. But my therapist kept telling me that the only way to heal is to grieve what you lost. So I was born in 1991 in Zambia. I was the first child to my mother, and I was the 5th child to my father. When I was born, my father was married to his wife. They had 4 children already. And so I didn't really see my dad that much growing up. He wasn't a stable father figure in my life. And I think from a young age, I had started to develop some abandonment issues and feeling or questioning that I was different from everyone around me and maybe just not good enough. But I didn't know that I felt these things. Growing up in the 90s, the first few years of my life, I was surrounded by so many of my aunts and my uncles. And, my mom would always have her cousins, her sisters, everyone around in the house. It was such a warm environment filled with so much love and so many people. But unfortunately, in the 90s in Zambia, there was an HIV epidemic. And that thing, it was so rampant in my country. It came and it ravished the people of my nation. It just went through my relatives and it took them one by one by one. Before I was 10 years old, I think I had lost about 10 people that I knew. That's 10 different funerals, 10 people who have disappeared from my life. And when we were young, we didn't really get to go to funerals or hear about death or be sat down and talked to about it. There was no grief counseling in Zambia, or anyway, it wasn't accessible to my family at that time. And cultural norms, even if it was there or they could access it, it just wasn't something that they took on, for us to understand really what was happening, that these people were dying, disappearing, not coming back, and that it wasn't our fault as the children. So I just sort of started getting really scared at that point. I remember that I'd always be holding my mom's hand everywhere we went, I started developing fear that people come and they don't stay, they leave, and why are they all leaving me? But these were unspoken thoughts, not really articulated in my mind to the point where I can do so now. Children don't have the ability to reason, so it's like when something happens, they always end up blaming themselves first. And at that time, even though I was losing so many of my aunties and my uncles and my cousins, it's like someone was more closer to them than I was. So for example, I lost my auntie and she was my mom's sister. So my mom was grieving her so hard, and you can imagine, my cousins lost their parents. So when I was young, it was like, oh my gosh, my cousin has lost their mommy and daddy. I still have my mom and my dad. So it's like their feelings are more important, obviously, during this time. but then I took that to a different extreme, like my feelings and my needs don't matter at all. And I started to believe that, and by the time I was 10, it's almost like I had this toxic shame around having emotions, around having feelings. When I was 10 years old, my mom got the opportunity to go to England for work. And at that time, my father decided to say, I want my daughter to live with me. So you go check out this opportunity, get yourself situated. Whilst you're there, I'm going to have my daughter. I want her to stay with me. I want her to know her siblings. And that's what happened. I moved to my father's house. I went from being an only child to being child number 5 of 6 children. It was a full house. A big change for me. But unfortunately, that year, between the ages of 11 to 12 years old, I was abused by my half-brother. And I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't tell anyone because who could I tell? Like, I didn't have anybody to tell. I didn't really feel protected in that situation, or by anybody, any of the adults around me. And I also thought it was my fault, to be honest. I thought that somehow I had made him do that to me. And maybe that, I deserved it. I felt a lot of shame. I was completely ashamed. When I thought about the situation, it made me very confused. And it made me wonder if I was really loved. And it was easier, I think, for me then to just say, of course I'm loved, it's just my fault, there's something wrong with me, than to really blame the abuser. It wasn't even an option in my mind at that time. So yeah, I just carried on that shame, and I didn't tell anyone until this year. That year as well, I went on a school trip towards the end of the year, and I had this teacher. He was my favorite teacher. He was my maths teacher. Then he was my form tutor. And yeah, he was like a father figure to me. I really looked up to him. But on that trip, he touched me inappropriately. And honestly, when I look back in my childhood, I think that's the first time I experienced depression was around that period. I really feel that is what finalized to me that I am broken, that there is something irreparably so deep within me internally that is damaged, that I am so different to everyone else around me, and that the problem is with me. That compounded my shame. I put it on, and it was just so heavy. And I remember that year just feeling hopeless towards the end of the year, like I had no strength left. There was a change in my personality. There was a switch in it, even when I look back now, and I just couldn't wait to be reunited with my mom. I wanted to leave the whole country. I just wanted to get out. Yeah. So shortly after my 12th birthday, great news, I was reunited with my mom. I got on the plane, flew to England, got to London, Heathrow, lights everywhere. And yeah, I was really happy to be back with my mom. But then, I realized that life wasn't going to be a bed of roses. At this point, my mom's sister's son, so my brother, and I call him my brother because my mom and her sister were best friends, right? So we grew up in the house together. She was pregnant first, my auntie was, with my brother, Chip, and then my mom was pregnant, and then they were pregnant at the same time. So it's like we were both born in my mom's house. So he's always been my brother. But he's my auntie's son. So my auntie at that point, she had passed away. And my brother was still in Zambia. So my mom was like stressed because she needed to be taking care of him. She needed him in her care. She needed him in England with us, And so she had to go through the whole process. She had to officially adopt him. She had to make sure that, she had enough money for them to give him a visa, everything. So my mom was working really, really hard. Like, there was no breaks for her. As a single mom, now you already have one child. And my brother also, he has sickle cell. So that compounded the stress because she was now having two lives depending on her. So I came to England on 25 December. On 26 December, by 6 a.m., my mom was in the hospital working. She was at work. And I remember that day when I woke up, she had left me a little calling card. Them like banana cards, like the banana with a monkey on, yeah. For £5. I don't know if anyone is old enough to remember those days. There was no iPhone, there was no iMessage, there was no WhatsApp. So yeah, I got the calling card that day, and I remember calling my teacher. Yeah, that teacher. I just felt really sad. I felt very isolated and alone. I didn't know who to talk to. And I remember calling him that day and just crying. I just cried on the phone. I cried and cried. And he said to me, "You're gonna have to be strong." So yeah, I hung up the phone. And from that day, I just resolved that I was going to be very strong. I actually got a job. Before I turned 13, I had a little job as a paper girl. I was delivering newspapers to the fancy houses near my home. And I'll do that before school. I'd wake up at like 5, 6 and deliver newspapers. Yeah, I got I don't know if it was £5 or something, but I was so happy to be earning and to be able to support my mom, to make her know that she didn't have to worry about me, that I could take care of myself and I could take care of her, that we could do this, and also would take care of my brother and make sure that he was here with us. I remember those days would always be by the Tesco. In Tesco, we'd go to Tesco, the Tesco value, and I knew it. I knew what time they would put the things in the clearance rack. So we'd just buy everything from there, and I'd go home, I'd cook while my mom was working night shifts so that when she comes, she has food to eat at home. And yeah, I wasn't even 13 years old yet. So I never told about what had happened in my father's house. I just grew up. So where we stayed in England, it was in Yorkshire, in a small village, beautiful little place, but it wasn't very diverse in the town. When I went to school, I was the only black girl in my school. And it was, again, a very isolating experience. I felt different. I was different from everyone there. And you can imagine, I've just come from Africa. Some of these kids have never seen a black person in their life, let alone an African girl, what's your hair like? Can I touch your hair? And do you live with lions? Do you live in a mud hut? It was just a sea of ignorance, right? And there's me just trying to get acclimatized to seeing so many Muzungus every single day. So yeah, I felt very different. I felt very much like the black sheep, pun intended. And so yeah, I think I was looking outside for some role models and some belonging. There were a few black girls in my town who are older than me, and I just clung on to them. It's like I was looking for that validation, approval, acceptance, and love. And so I just followed them everywhere they went. They had their own journeys, teenagers trying to figure themselves out. But yeah, I followed them like a little puppy because I just wanted to be loved, accepted, and to feel like there was somewhere where there was room for my emotions. So one day the girls ended up taking me with them to a party in Leeds. And I remember I was 14 years old, and I met a man there who was in his 30s, so definitely more than twice my age, but I don't know exactly how old he was. One day I got drunk one night, and he raped me. Yeah. I didn't tell anyone about it. I really believed that it was my fault. In fact, it took me many years to not believe that what happened that night was my fault. And yeah, one of the other girls, she knew about it, and she said she can no longer be friends with me. And yeah, that just compounded my shame. It made me feel that like I was dirty, and really I had no value. And I think from that point on is when I started forgetting. I was 14, so I think that's when my mom had traveled to Zambia. So she wasn't around when this was happening. But yeah, I didn't tell her. I didn't tell anyone. I just carried the shame again. At that point, I believe is when I started to forget. So I have blanks in my memory. I just don't remember years of my life. It's just black when I think of that time or I try to go back. So you can imagine that when I started this journey in 2024 of reconciling and reconnecting to the wounds of my past, guys, I was so broken. It was a painful and difficult process for me. I felt really confused about who I was. I felt so confused about what had happened, what it meant. I felt really broken, like I am a damaged person and I'm shattered in pieces. Just this broken person going through life with this mask, and no one can see that inside she's just broken in so many pieces. And I believed it as well. You know, I had so much shame in me. I was so ashamed of the abuse. I was ashamed that it happened. I was ashamed that I let it happen. I was ashamed for being weak. I was ashamed that I was ever vulnerable. And it's like I was even ashamed of that little child for just not being strong, you know? Like I built these unrelenting standards of perfectionism in my life. It's like no matter how good I looked, it wasn't enough. No matter how much I achieved, it wasn't enough. No matter what I acquired, it wasn't enough. No matter just how good I was, no matter how helpful I was, even no matter how religious I was, it still wasn't good enough, you know? Like I did everything, like, you know, no matter if I don't drink, don't smoke, do modesty from head to toe, you know, celibacy, everything, no sex until marriage, and knowing all the hymns. Girl, I'm gonna know all these Bible verses up and down. I'll keep the Sabbath perfectly. But no matter how much value I created on myself, deep down inside, I still believed that I was not good enough. The truth is, I never really wanted to be associated with brokenness because we live in a world that is not attracted to broken things, you know? Like, who wants to? All of us, like the people who I followed on my feed, were not broken people, you know? They're not people who had stories like I did. It's that it wasn't matching, you know what I mean? I remember my therapist would sometimes be like, oh, Metiya, you're a survivor, but look at everything you've been through. Whew! And I hated that word. I hated the word survivor. I would be like, yeah, but, you know, it's not glam. Like, it's not given. It's not given it, girl. It's not given aesthetics. You know, it doesn't match the vibe, honey. This and it. Oh my gosh. But I was, you guys, it's true. I have to be honest. I associated like that survivor word with weakness, with vulnerability, with so much toxic shame. And it's like I was so much critical. I had so much criticism for myself and no compassion for what that child had gone through and what I had gone through, what my story was about. But the whole time we kept on praying. I think, I had about maybe 8 sessions of therapy that would just end with me in tears. I would literally just be flung there crying, and my therapist would be like, let us pray. And she would pray for me, and she would ask God to help me and to meet me in the broken places. And I had nowhere to run. And as I started going through the journey, I realized that I'd never ever trusted God with my wounds. I'd never trusted God with my broken places and with this broken, shattered heart. And I remember coming across this sermon by Dr. Anita Phillips. So she talks a lot about accepting and acknowledging the pain and the trauma that you have been through in order to heal. She says this thing about how we go through life sometimes thinking that we deserve the trauma that happened to us. That I'm glad it happened to me and it didn't happen to my cousin. Maybe it happened to me to make me stronger. And it's like we try to okay, God, it happened, but God is real, but I can't mix my faith. If I say I'm depressed, but God is real, it's like I don't really believe. And she's like, no, that's not how it is. God wants you to go to him with your pain. The longer we store pain in us, the more it continues to bleed. And this is when we see, pain just going from one generation to another. Trauma cycles being repeated. Generational trauma just from one to another, to another, to another, and just start wondering now, why does this always happen in my family? I started going on this prayer call, guys. It was like at 1 a.m. And I remember that really taught me how to pray. And I started praying and fasting in the spirit. I was doing that, and I remember as I was going through that, I started learning that God wants me to go to him with my brokenness. God is not scared of the wounds that I don't want to uncover. It doesn't faze him that actually this thing is too deep, or it's too scary, or it's too much. He wants to go there with me, you guys. And I was listening to Dr. Anita, and she said in one of her sermons that even Jesus asked why. Jesus took his pen to God and he said, why have you forsaken me? And for the first time in my life, I said, God, why did you let that happen to me? Why did I have to go through the abuse? Why did I have to go through the rape? Why did I have to have so much loss? And honestly, it's not until I started asking why, until I started crying and grieving about these things, that I started being delivered. I started seeing the light. I started receiving answers. I heard God saying, Metiya, I never left you. I was always with you. I never left you the way I never left Joseph. Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery. His own flesh and blood, they sold him into slavery. They actually tried to kill him. They wanted him dead, and all that time, someone could have looked at Joseph and thought, you're done, it's over for you. But God said, I was always with him. I took what the enemy meant for evil and I turned it around for your good. I sat down and I had to ask myself, how can you say this thing made me stronger? It didn't make me stronger. You know how people sometimes, they're like, yeah, but you wouldn't be who you were if you didn't go through that. I don't want to be who I am then if I have to go through that. And I realized that it's not God's plan for us to be hurt. It's not God's plan for little children to be abused. It's not God's plan for girls and boys to be assaulted, abused, neglected, hurt, grieving, just the way it wasn't God's intention that death should be introduced in the world. God knew that even when he gave free will to all creatures and all humans, that they would make the choice to use that free will to harm the innocent children. And even knowing that, God made a way out. God knew that there would be breaking, but he also planned that the breaking would not be the end. He said, greater is the light that is in you than the darkness that is in the world. I started reading, you guys. I read Jeremiah 29 verse 11 says, for I know the plans I have for you. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans of good and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. I was like, wow, God had a plan for me and God has a plan for my life. Guys, I started reading this thing. I started from the beginning. I went to Genesis. I saw in the beginning that God created the heavens and the earth. and everything that is in them, that he made light, he created the waters, that he created the beautiful birds and the majestic animals. But on the sixth day, God said, let us make man in our own image. It was a beautiful world by that time. There was no death. It was perfection. Everything was just nice, But God looked at it and he said, it's not complete without mankind. It's not complete without Metiya. Let us make Metiya in our own image. And God made mankind in his own image. Male and female, he made them. When I read that, you guys, I realized that I wasn't just born because my parents met. It's like even before my parents met each other, God had already chosen me. I read Jeremiah 1 verse 5. It says, even before you were formed in your mother's womb, I knew you. I chose you. I set you apart. I knew you, Metiya. So even before your father ever laid eyes on your mom, the eye contact, there was already a plan for me. God already had seen me. And guess what? Even though he knew everything that would happen in my life, he believed that my ending would be greater than my beginning, that his purpose for me would triumph the pain and the evil and the wickedness of the devil and of this world. Ephesians 1 verse 4, and it says, even before he formed the world, God chose you and he loved you. And the maths just started mathsing. All of a sudden, it started mathsing up. I realized that my value was not based on my parents. My value was not based on how I came into this world. My value was not even based on what had been taken away from me, on those people who had abused me, on those people who had hurt me, or anything that life had taken away from me. My value was based on the one who created me. The one who created the heavens, the earth, the sky, the whole world and everything in it. He said that I was good. Even before I was broken, God saw me and said that I was very good. Even during the breaking, God saw me and said I was very good. And guess what? Even after I believed I was too broken, God saw me and he said that I was still very good. I wanted to share this here today because I know that I'm not the only one who has felt too broken, too damaged, or like what I lost was too much. I don't know what you have been through. Maybe you're watching this and your trauma is more than my trauma. You could be watching this and you can't even relate to the things I'm saying. But somewhere along the way, you felt like you lost something, like something was taken away from you. Like there was something that happened along your journey that started to make you question your value. That somewhere along the way, you started believing that you had to create that value for yourself. In your appearance, in your achievements, your degrees, your education, your career, your accolades, your titles, your status, that maybe you had to create that value in yourself because it was so far gone from you. I want to say to anyone who has ever lost something that you are loved. On August 3rd, for the first time in my life, I stood up in front of a small congregation. I was shaking, you guys. I was like trembling, but I told my story. And for the first time, I started feeling the shackles falling, breaking off, shame going away, guilt going away, condemnation and fear leaving me. I was crying and I was trembling, but I told it. On 6th September, my birthday, I attended a prayer conference for the first time in my life. And I told my story again. This time I wasn't shaking. This time I wasn't trembling. This time I wasn't crying. I stood up and I said, I met a man who knew everything about me. He met me at the well of my brokenness and darkness. He knew everything about my life and what I had been through, and he thought I was worth creating. He thought you were worth creating. And he met me and he healed me. And he wants to heal you too. 33 years of a life filled with pain anguish, misery, shame. 33 years of tragedy and trauma. They nailed him on a cross, but death by crucifixion took hours. So when they nailed him to the cross, they said that it's not the crucifixion that killed him, but it was a broken heart. 33 years, and Jesus Christ of Nazareth was dead. People looked at this situation and thought it was hopeless. They thought that the darkness of this world had succeeded, and they called him way too broken to repair. But 3 days later, they rolled the stone away from the tomb, and guess what? The grave was empty. Jesus was resurrected again. When he was nailed to that cross, he defeated sin and he overcame death for everybody. What the enemy meant for evil, God had turned it around for good. They thought that he was too broken to succeed, but there was a blessing in the breaking. And that blessing is for me, and that blessing is for you. It says that for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Jesus died on that cross so that you and me could have eternal life forever. John 10 verse 10 says that the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy. But I have come that they might have life, and they might have it abundantly. Abundant life is a life of joy, it's a life of freedom, and it's a life of healing. And Jesus has come that you and I can have access to that today. My name is Metiya Chipala Ikowa, and I'm a survivor. No, wait, I'm more than a conqueror through him who first loved me. And so can you be.